Just before dawn, a few small patches of ground in the middle of the Dnipro suddenly changed status. And what once looked like quiet terrain became a place that swallowed the tempo of an entire unit. There was no cheering for a big breakthrough. There was only a colder sign instead. As the warning system began to flicker, supply routes were read like a script, and the men out on the water started to understand they were being squeezed step by step, day by day. What is unfolding is a sequence of strikes with clear order, and each step is designed to force the other side to choose between retreating in confusion or staying to be ground down. And when a small foothold on the river loses its rhythm, the effect does not stop on the water, because it spreads into the contested ground on land, right as every side is looking toward summer. So what made a few islands in the middle of the Dnipro suddenly become a decisive link? And why could what is happening here be an early signal for how the battlefield will change in the next phase? Let's break it down with military force. On the Dnipro, small islands are not minor terrain because they work as forward lookout posts that help Russian units pressure both riverbanks. A drone team that launches from an island gains shorter flight time, a clearer angle over tree lines, and faster transfer of coordinates to gunners. In a river fight, that speed matters, because seconds of warning can decide whether a boat is spotted early or whether a position is hit before soldiers can move. These islands also shorten the distance between the sensor and the shooter, so a sighting can become an artillery correction before a target has time to disperse. From those strips of land, operators can keep drones close to the water, which complicates detection and reduces reaction time on the bank. Over time, this role has made the islands a platform for UAV pressure, even when conditions on the banks limit visibility. That is why Ukrainian planners treat the islands as a system, not as isolated outposts, and they focus on the nodes that keep the system alive. Ukraine's opening phase therefore targets the machinery behind the island presence, rather than attempting a costly landing under active surveillance. The first aims are rear depots, command points, and launch-related sites behind the line, where batteries are charged, antennas are raised, spare parts are stored, and flight plans are coordinated. When those nodes are disrupted, the island detachments may still hold ground, but their ability to scout, warn, and cue fire begins to weaken. Open reporting highlights drones carrying modified TM-62 mines, which turns a common anti-tank weapon into an air-delivered strike against fixed infrastructure. A depot or a command shelter is a stable location that can be mapped and revisited, so repeated pressure can break routines that keep UAV sorties steady. Command posts concentrate radios, power, and staff who translate sightings into orders, so a single disruption can shrink coordination windows and delay warnings. When storage sites are hit, shortages can appear quickly, especially for batteries, propellers, and other consumables that drones burn through at high tempo. As crews relocate equipment and rebuild links, coverage thins, gaps appear in the sky picture, and Russian teams must spend more time hiding than observing. For Ukraine, this approach limits exposure of assault troops to river fire and mines, while still shifting the balance without a headline-grabbing crossing. The first phase is therefore best understood as pressure on the eyes and ears of the system, not a rush to seize every patch of land. When the eyes and ears weaken, the fight compresses toward one lifeline, the boat routes, because an island unit cannot survive on firepower alone if supplies and evacuation cannot move. Ukraine's second phase on the Dnipro Islands shifts the fight from detection to survival, because an island position can endure shelling longer than it can endure isolation. Once pressure builds, the only link left is the water route, and that route is both the supply line and the escape line. Russian detachments on the islands depend on boats to move ammunition, food, water, fuel, batteries, medical kits, and replacement parts for radios and drones. They also depend on boats to rotate exhausted troops and evacuate the wounded, so crossing becomes a routine requirement, not an occasional task. Even a small delay can ripple through a position, because watch schedules, drone shifts, and guard rotations all assume that supplies arrive on time. Ukraine's aim in this phase is to make every routine trip dangerous so that time itself starts working against the garrison. FPV drones and other UAVs focus on boats as they approach the islands, because a boat is a clear silhouette against water and its path is often predictable. Traffic tends to funnel through workable channels, reed gaps, and familiar landing points, so pilots can watch a few corridors instead of searching the whole river. When strikes begin to hit those approaches, supply runs turn into short sprints, and crews delay departures to avoid daylight or to wait for calmer winds. Delays then stack into shortages, because small units burn through basics quickly when they stay alert for long hours and keep devices powered. Ammunition matters, but batteries matter too, because radios, night optics, and drones depend on charging cycles that cannot be improvised on a mudbank. Fuel and engine parts matter as well, because a damaged motor can strand a boat mid-river and turn a rescue attempt into a second loss. The most serious pressure point is medical evacuation, because wounded soldiers who cannot be moved consume shelter space, attention, and scarce supplies. When evacuation is blocked, commanders face a harsh arithmetic, because they must choose between protecting boats for future supplies or risking more boats to save lives now. That dilemma corrodes morale, and it also corrodes discipline because small groups start acting for immediate survival rather than coordinated defense. In an isolated position, rumors move faster than orders, and anxiety spreads when soldiers hear fewer engines, see fewer arrivals, and receive fewer clear signals. As the boat route is cut, the posture shifts from holding with confidence to enduring with uncertainty, and the clock becomes the enemy. Units begin rationing, but rationing is never clean, because some posts are exposed, some shelters flood, and some men carry wounds that demand more water and care. Isolation also changes behavior because troops start gathering at certain times, sharing limited chargers, and moving along the same covered paths. Those repeated patterns become visible from above, especially when the same dugouts, tree lines, and ruined buildings are used as meeting points and storage corners. Scarcity forces repetition. Repetition creates a map, and each observation cycle sharpens that map for Ukrainian operators. A single boat strike can even reveal unloading points, because survivors run toward the nearest shelter and rescuers often return to the same place. Over time, the island force looks less like a hidden outpost and more like a constrained routine, and routines are easier to target than surprises. This is why Ukraine does not need to destroy the entire garrison at once to gain an advantage, because uncertainty in resupply forces dispersion and weakens cohesion. Once logistics are locked, the opponent does not have to be smashed in a single blow, because the lack itself will pull them into the open and set the conditions for sustained attrition. In a river fight, that is often the decisive shift, because control of the crossing lanes can matter more than control of the sandbars themselves. Phase 3 on the Dnipro Islands is where pressure turns into removal, because a cutoff position starts to reveal itself in predictable ways. Russian troops may still hold trenches and dugouts, but they do so under a shrinking roof of safety. Ukraine increases strikes on fortifications, shelters, and small gathering points, and it chooses moments when defenders are tired, hungry, and unsure of what is coming next. The attacks are systematic rather than theatrical. A shelter is hit, then the unit has to move. Movement creates exposure, and exposure creates another target. UAVs watch for brief windows when soldiers leave cover, carry supplies, or shift to a new hole. When that movement is seen, precision fire can follow quickly, and the effect is cumulative. This phase also targets the edges of safety, such as trench entrances, tree lines, and ruined sheds where men pause to breathe. Each strike does not need to wipe out a detachment, because it only needs to force another relocation, another delay, and another mistake. Islands limit where people can hide, and they limit how many routes can be used without being noticed. When shelters are damaged, troops start using the same remaining cover, and that concentrates risk. For Russian crews, every lost shelter also means fewer dry places to store radios, optics, and medical supplies at night. When observation posts are hit, units lose confidence to stay in place, and they change positions more often. Frequent changes can look like initiative, But on an island, they become a trap, because every path leaves traces and every repeat pattern becomes easier to predict. Pressure also changes behavior. Soldiers cluster when they share chargers, treat injuries, or receive instructions, and Ukraine tries to turn those pauses into danger. A short meeting can become a signature because footsteps, heat, and disturbed brush show up again and again from above. Drones can wait, return, and verify, so darkness does not end the pattern and poor weather only slows it. When defenders repair a shelter or dig a new one, the work itself marks the location. Fresh soil, cut branches, and new tracks can point to a spot that did not exist the day before. Ukraine can then test that spot with a light strike, and if the response is frantic movement, the cycle repeats. Reports have suggested that some Russian positions were reduced or abandoned after this sustained pressure. That claim matters, but it requires caution because public statements can be broad and the scale is hard to confirm fast. Independent indicators such as imagery, geolocated footage, and consistent reporting across outlets are needed before firm conclusions. Still, the operational effect can be explained without overstating numbers. If troop density drops on the islands, then the islands lose value as eyes and ears. Fewer observers means fewer launches, fewer spotting cycles, and slower warning for activity on both banks. That changes the rhythm along the river, because Ukrainian movement faces fewer immediate cues from above. It also reduces the ability to direct fire quickly, which is why the islands mattered in the first place. By the end of this phase, the river foothold is weakened as a platform even if some ground remains occupied. Ukraine does not need a clean evacuation to claim a shift, since it needs the island network to stop functioning as a reliable staging area. The moment the islands stop delivering steady surveillance and fast queuing, pressure on nearby bank positions begins to loosen. That is the intent here. Once that happens, attention can move to the land fight, where contested zones decide who can shape the line for the summer. Near Oleksandrivsk, close to Huliaipol in the Zaporizhia sector, Ukraine is not chasing a sweeping breakthrough. Instead, it is running careful local counterattacks to push back small Russian groups inside the gray zone. This gray zone is the strip where trenches, tree lines, and ruined farm buildings blur into contested ground. In this space, even a few infiltrators can seed fear by firing at patrols, laying mines, and watching roads. They tend to move in pairs or small teams, then freeze for hours to avoid being spotted. If they stay long enough, they create a habit of presence that forces Ukraine to keep more troops awake and more vehicles off the roads. That slow pressure is the point, because it stretches defenses without requiring a large assault. Oleksandrivsk matters because it sits near routes that connect rear villages to the forward belt around Huliaipol. A small gap here can let infiltrators slip towards supply tracks and force detours. Local counterattacks are designed to remove those pockets before they grow into a wider threat. They involve pushes by assault groups that advance under drone overwatch and then stop once the objective is secured. The intent is to clear the immediate danger, not to chase deep into unknown ground. That restraint preserves manpower, since the gray zone punishes anyone who stays exposed long. Ukraine answers with a layered routine that starts with UAV observation. Small drones scan for fresh tracks, disturbed brush, and new soil from hurried digging. They return on repeat cycles because a single sighting can be noise, but repeated activity becomes a pattern. Once a corridor is confirmed, artillery pressure is applied by grid to deny rest and force relocation. Electronic warfare adds another squeeze, since jamming can disrupt short-range links and slow coordination. When reaction slows, infiltrators lose rhythm, because they cannot time movement, and they cannot be sure they are unseen. They also face a supply problem, since batteries, medical items, and food must be shared in hidden places. Sharing means gathering, and gathering creates signatures that drones can spot, even when the group tries to stay quiet. Under constant pressure, teams compress into fewer hide sites, which increases mistakes and makes them easier to track. When Ukraine retakes a point here, It is usually because the point changes geometry. A village edge can open sightlines onto a road that was previously masked by buildings or trees. A small rise can improve observation over fields, and a tree line can hide a drone crew that guides fire. Each position held adds another angle, which makes the next infiltration attempt harder to stage. It also reduces the number of safe routes for withdrawal, since watched corridors turn retreats into chases. The practical result is not a dramatic headline, but a line that is straighter and less exposed to probing. That space lets units rotate, repair defenses, and reduce the daily drain caused by constant alarms. It also sets rules for the next fights, because the side that controls the gray zone controls where contact happens. These moves are not meant to explode into a sudden offensive. They are meant to turn contested ground into a controlled trap, built from observation, firepower, and steady pressure. The gains near Oleksandrivsk are being treated as a construction site, not as a headline, because the priority is to harden the line before summer pressure rises. The basic idea is to turn contested space into a defensive belt where movement is slowed, exposed, and then punished. Newly secured ground gives engineers room to extend trenches, deepen shelters, and link small strongpoints so units can hold even when drones are overhead. Minefields can be laid with clearer intent, not as random walls, but as steering tools that funnel vehicles and infantry into narrow lanes. Those lanes are then measured, marked, and connected to fire plans so defenders do not improvise under stress. Observation posts are also pushed to better angles, because one extra line of sight can reduce surprise and improve the timing of warning calls. Engineers also study drainage, soil, and cover, because summer rains and artillery can collapse shallow works and expose routes. Even simple changes like clearing a narrow field of view or building a covered crawl path can decide whether a squad survives a first contact. UAVs sit at the center of this belt as a constant sensing layer. Persistent drones do not only hunt targets, they confirm that mine lanes remain intact, that fresh breaches are spotted, and that new approaches are mapped quickly. They rotate drone crews to keep watch without burning out quickly. Early warning often starts with practical signs, such as new tracks, new antenna masts, more vehicles staging behind tree lines, or repeated movement at the same hours. Once those signs appear, artillery coordinates can be refined and stored, so the first salvos arrive faster and with better adjustment. Fire plans can include pre-selected aim points for mortars, guns, and loitering drones, so the response does not depend on radio calls. This matters because the attacker's biggest vulnerability is time spent clearing obstacles in the open. If the defender can keep eyes on the lane, the attacker must choose between slowing down to survive or speeding up and risking losses. A fortified belt also raises the cost of retreat. If a push stalls, withdrawal routes can be watched, and columns can be struck when they bunch at narrow exits or crossings. That is why defenders build the system around rhythm and logistics, not only around earthworks. New positions need ammunition caches, medical points, protected resupply paths, and reliable links that carry target data from drones to guns without delay. Units practice moving under jamming, and they build redundancy with wired lines, runners, and radios. Repair teams close gaps before they widen, and camouflage reduces the chance that a new trench becomes an obvious target. Decoys are used to draw fire and reveal hostile batteries, which supports counterfire and safer resupply. The result is a line designed to absorb pressure and still keep its tempo through repeated assaults. Ground is taken to build a kill zone, not to show a map. Once the kill zone is in place, the next question is whether Russia is forced to commit reserves early just to reopen the approaches. As Russia builds forces for a summer push, Ukraine is trying to control the timing of the fight, not just the line on the map. The method is selective counterattack that targets key junctions, fieldworks, and short stretches of ground that matter as staging space. If those points change hands, Moscow faces an immediate choice. It can accept the loss and adjust plans, or it can try to retake the area quickly to restore momentum. Either way, reserves that were meant to stay protected become units that must move, concentrate, and reveal themselves. That exposure is the opening Ukraine is seeking before the main campaign window. A few kilometers can have outsized value if they force fresh formations to deploy early, burn fuel, and take casualties during movement and setup. Once committed, reserves also consume repair capacity, replacement vehicles, drones, and trained operators, and those are harder to rebuild than ground is to redraw. This is pressure by schedule, because the goal is to make the opponent spend strength in the pre-campaign phase. It also tests command discipline, because rush deployments tend to create traffic jams, radio congestion, and accidental exposure. Every early move forces more fuel convoys, more maintenance cycles, and more time spent repairing rather than training for the peak push. It also forces commanders to choose between saving reserves for one main thrust or feeding them into repeated local fights. Ukraine's toolkit is designed to punish the vulnerable moment when reserves transition from storage to action. UAVs provide detection and confirmation, so strikes are based on observed movement rather than guesswork. Artillery adds cumulative damage, so even surviving elements emerge with fewer vehicles, fewer crews, and fewer safe routes. Electronic warfare slows reaction time and disrupts coordination, which makes it harder to mask buildup or recover after contact. The approach also links back to the Dnipro line, where reduced Russian UAV activity can lower the speed of warning and fire queuing along the river. That shift can ease daily risk for nearby civilians and for Ukrainian logistics, even if it does not remove danger entirely. The wider point is that summer will not be decided only by territorial markers. It will be decided by system endurance, meaning who can keep sensors working, pass orders reliably, and sustain supplies while being disrupted. From here, each forecast returns to one core question: which side can keep its eyes, ears, and supply rhythm functioning when tempo rises and the season turns into a grind? Across the Dnipro Islands, the story reads like a compact campaign with a clear sequence of pressure points. Ukraine first works to blunt Russian drone awareness, then tightens the river lifeline, and finally keeps striking shelters and small troop clusters until the island network operates with less tempo. Near Oleksandrivsk and Huliaipol, the pattern is different but linked, because local counterattacks clear infiltrating teams from the gray zone and convert regained ground into a denser defensive belt. That belt depends on persistent UAV observation, rehearsed fire plans, and positions built to slow any approach and punish any pause. Two paths frame the summer. Russia can try to retake staging areas quickly, but that risks pulling reserves forward into prepared fire zones before momentum forms. Or Russia can delay and grind, while Ukraine keeps selective actions that deny stable footholds and force choices. The decisive variable is system endurance under disruption. Subscribe to Military Force for clear, fact-based analysis that explains how wars unfold and what choices can prevent escalation. Turn on notifications and share this episode with someone who cares about peace but wants real details. Comment with the next battle, weapon system, or policy question you want covered.